There we go. All right. So I'm assuming everyone is settled in. I know that's a big room to pack in a lot of, or a small room to pack in a lot of people. Harry sent me the photo of night school. I have my webcam up. It's still nighttime here. It should become daylight in about the next 30 minutes. But I appreciate that you're all packed into that little room so that we can talk about our next sessions, which is SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, and then we'll wrap up with our how to make money. Just keep in mind, I'm probably going to have to speed through some of this because of time constraint. We've got about an hour and a half to get through material, so I want to try and get through as much as I can. So just know that I might have to speed through a couple of things, but you'll have the decks to be able to look at afterward as a worst case. Particularly, I want to make sure to mention this now. On the Making Money deck, I have, it's like 67 slides, and I had purposely put a good 30 of them in there for you as aftermath to look at. So like I said before, if you haven't taken a chance to download them, make sure that you get those so that way you'll get all the material that I'm going to walk through if in the event I don't get to absolutely everything. And the money-making stuff has a lot of P&Ls and information in it that came from Microsoft for you to take advantage of. So with that, I'm going to kick it off, go through SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, and then we'll flip it over and start to talk about making money. I'll try and get the opportunity for us to sprinkle in as many questions as we can get to, but I also want to make sure that if for some reason I don't get to answer your question, I want to make sure that you have my information to give me an email. I know a couple of you have already messaged me on LinkedIn. And because of our constraints for how we have to work here in China this week, I'll be back next week. So if I don't get to the invitation right away to connect on LinkedIn, just know that I will as soon as I get back from China. Same thing if you send me an email as well. But everyone, just to make sure that you have an email, I'll give you the easiest one, melanie@microsoftprincess.com. And that way you can send me an email. I'll get to you as soon as I can to try and answer any questions that you can because I'm not there in person. I want to make sure that you have a way to connect to me with anything that you need. So that said, as we dive into SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, we're going to start out with much of the same approach that we took with the licensing in understanding what the components are, and then we'll dive into a couple of the features to give you a high level. So with SharePoint and OneDrive, and I planted the seed earlier with you in our conversation when we talked about the licensing piece. But when you get an Office 365 subscription, it will come with OneDrive and it will come with SharePoint. From a Microsoft messaging standpoint, Microsoft is really pushing for us to move to OneDrive. However, I am going to tell you a little bit different, and I have a very strong reason why. So I know this is an independent tour, so that's why I'm giving you this information the way that I see it running a SharePoint practice. So when we talk about OneDrive versus SharePoint, on the screen that I have for you here, OneDrive should be considered space per employee. In other words, if you have a document that is on a desktop or a document that's in the My Docs, theoretically, that could be moved to OneDrive. People can access it universally anywhere, things like that. It's a great way to be able to connect with it, but I just want to make sure that you know, from my take, I tell everyone, if it's a personal document that's going to be stored, move it to OneDrive. That message may change later on this year or into next year, but that's the messaging I personally tell everyone today. The other thing with SharePoint is that if it is a company document, in other words, it's a document that's like an expense report, template, or it's a marketing document that everybody should see as part of the company, that is where SharePoint can play very well. So the reason why I'm being very strong in telling you this message different from Microsoft is because there's no governance around OneDrive right now. And so what happens is companies move all their documents into OneDrive. What happens when the employee leaves? The employee technically owns the document. In SharePoint, it's a community document. No one person owns it. You'll be able to see who uploaded it when they edited it, but that's a community document. So if the employee leaves, it doesn't get lost in the system, where in OneDrive it could. And as soon as you uncheck the license and disable the user, you've lost all of that data that they initially uploaded. So it's a little bit of a challenge right now in seeing OneDrive as the dedicated space for all company documents, and that's why I'm telling you separate the method right now with space for employees with SharePoint and personal only kind of documents for the business that they might work on individually go into OneDrive. So one of the things with SharePoint, and I mentioned this earlier in the licensing, is that it's scaled out by user. So there's a default amount of space that you get per tenant. Tenant means Office 365 account. And then you add on, based on the number of users, you're granted an additional amount of space. It varies every single month. So just know you need to check and see what the latest is. But the other thing, too, about that is that you can buy additional space in SharePoint. You cannot buy additional space in OneDrive. So just kind of keep that in mind. When you're allocating the space, you're really allocating it out for the team sites, and you're building it out that way. One other thing to keep in mind, too, is that you do get capability to successfully lock things down through permissions, and permissions work much the same as what you would know in working in AD. So on the network drives where we create the user group and we add the users and what their access rights are, that will be very familiar to you overall in SharePoint. The other thing, too, that we learn with 365 in general is that we get options to integrate with AD. You can do ADFS, which is a two-token authentication. You can do a DIRSing. You can also keep those rights in Azure as well if you want, but the point is all of those can apply at the security levels that you need them to on SharePoint, just as you can do with the network drives. The other thing that I'll make sure to mention, and this is a big sticky point with SharePoint that you need to know, especially if you plan on actually supporting SharePoint, is that there are things called document libraries. By default with a team site, when a new tenant is created, you get one document library, but you can add on more and more sites and all that stuff. But with this, with the document library, the one thing you need to know is that the limit is 5,000 items. That's an item limit. So as I mentioned, you can have more than one in SharePoint, but you're limited to 5,000 items just in total. So the reason why I want to make sure that you know that is because if a user or a company goes over those 5,000 items per library and they're using something called the sync tool, that sync tool doesn't work. The other thing that doesn't work is permissions. Automatically, over 5,000 items, you can't modify permissions. So Microsoft is really locking down on that item limit. There's no workaround for it other than to move documents to another library. In the server version, we have the ability to control the threshold limit. We do not have that ability in whatever way, shape, or form, not even through PowerShell, to make that modification in a library within SharePoint in 365. So from a capacity and from a planning and from a strategy standpoint, that takes a little bit more time. And that's where specialists come in and can help out and support you through that process if you don't want to take that on yourself. But just know from a help desk perspective and from a support perspective, that will be the #1 thing that you see as an issue, is that users can't, all of a sudden, they aren't able to create new views, they're not able to work with permissions, and the sync tool just magically stops working. So just keep those things in mind with SharePoint. Now, OneDrive equals one drive. You can only have one drive. You can't expand. That's what it is. It's 1 terabyte per user, and that equals 20,000 items. One thing that you're going to find is that typically whenever you move documents in there, which, by the way, is a whole specialty project in itself, but if you're going to move into the My Site area, which is what the old name was, and now it's been rebranded OneDrive for Business, but that piece, you just have to keep in mind, is very limited. And so when you go into the OneDrive for Business, there'll be a folder that says Shared with Everyone. And typically what we do is move those documents into that Shared with Everyone, but everyone can be everyone inside of the company, and everyone can be external people as well. And you can be very precise on how you want to set that stuff up. But the one point that I want to make is that one person still owns that document even though it's being uploaded into an area called shared with everyone. And the reason why I'm making sure to tell you that is because when you go into the shared with everyone, you'll start to see by user, and then you'll start to see the individual information. And that's why, from a governance perspective, it becomes a little bit difficult to maintain and control through a change of people, things like that. The other thing is that it is 20,000 items, so you just have to be really aware of that. There are a lot of people that like to hoard and keep things to themselves and not share with anyone to begin with. And so that 20,000 limit may be a bit of an issue, and there's no increase on that. It is what it is. You can't move things to another area. It's in their individual OneDrive. The only option would be to move things over to SharePoint and be able to try and work around that. So a little bit of a difference there when we start talking about OneDrive. I mentioned earlier that there is an opportunity to eventually see this change to unlimited. And part of the reason for that right now that it's in beta is because there's a compete option for us as partners to work with. Instead of having the user go to Dropbox, which might be common for them, they could have a secure option available within SharePoint with the great parameters and security and encryption options that are included as part of Office 365. So just know that that may come out in the future, but for right now, today, with any Office 365 subscription, OneDrive for Business is limited per user at 20,000 items, and that's all you get. You can't work around that today. So I'm going to try and give you a demo of SharePoint and OneDrive, and then we'll talk about a couple of other things. But before we do that, I'm actually going to go into a couple of tips, and then you'll see the demo right after it to help clarify. So when it comes to SharePoint, there are some top 5 things that everyone should be knowing if they're going to support it. Number 1, you should design for the items. In other words, there are network discovery tools that are out there. There's one personally I use that I can't give away, but it's $50 per license, and I basically put it up on the network. It's per server, so I just download it onto that server and spend the $50 for the license, and it will actually map. It'll look at all the map drives on any area and then figure out what the usage is and give me some really awesome reports. And that's what I actually use for capacity planning within SharePoint. So for example, I'll know that there's 300 gigs worth of data and that 80% of that happens to be older than 4 years. So it's giving the owner of the business decision-making capabilities to say, okay, well, going into SharePoint, we're not going to move the majority of these items knowing that they're old. We'll look at archiving options and other ways to work around it, but we want the stuff that's more recent to go up. We don't need, every single document we've ever produced. The other thing, too, is that it helps them identify ways of cleaning up. So, for example, a lot of times we know as partners dealing with network drives, things are not always current. Things happen to just explode over the course of time, and nobody goes in and cleans everything up. And so this is a way for them to start to recognize what might be old and what might not be needed. The other thing, too, that this particular program that I use works is that it includes duplicate file names, because a lot of times we find that things are in multiple places. One document can be in 5 different locations within the network drive. So this helps to identify those kind of areas as well for improvement. So that way, when we move things into SharePoint, we can determine which one location it's going to reside, who's going to get access to it, and then make all of that happen accordingly. So designing for items becomes imperative that you understand, and that network discovery can help you do that to make that difference and have all that available. Now, the other thing that I'll mention to you, and this is a big thing you should know when you're supporting SharePoint, is that version control becomes super important. And the reason why I'm emphasizing that is because, and I'll show you through the demo in just a minute, but in SharePoint, Microsoft will turn on versioning by default, but they won't limit it, even though their own best practice says that it should be 5 versions available at most. And the reason why that becomes so important is because the #1 reason that people grow out of space and continue to have to buy space is due to these versions. So to give you a quick example, if you have one document that's 500 or one document that's 100 kilobytes, and you have 5 versions of that, that document name is really not a 100 kilobyte file, it's a 500 kilobyte file. And the reason why is because when Microsoft saves individual versions, or in incremental versions, it's really individual. It's not saying, okay, the delta between version 1 and version 2 is this, so we're just going to save the changes. No, it actually saves physical individual copies hiding behind that name, so that way when you need to restore a mistake to a newer version, you can do that effortlessly. So the downside is it's definitely a space hoard, and that's where we need to take a look and say, okay, how can we limit this? And that's where Microsoft's best practice came in of 5 versions. It actually came initially from internally from Microsoft IT and then became a best practice. So the one thing you should know is that on all document libraries, you want to lock that down to 5 versions to avoid the incremental storage space that's going to occur over time. Right now, the storage space is 20 cents per gig, which seems inexpensive, but when you're dealing with 400 gig worth of data sitting in SharePoint and OneDrive, then you got to look at it. So and see what options you have. So just know that just in general, locking that down to 5 versions can be helpful. The other thing I can mention to you too is that you have to know your permissions. Permissions, as I mentioned, are very similar to AD that we know and love, but when you get into SharePoint, the one thing you should know is that you can activate the license for the user in the portal of 365 to say, yes, they get a SharePoint license as part of their subscription, but then you have to go into the individual SharePoint sites and allocate where they should have access. I mean, the license just says, yes, you have access to SharePoint, but that doesn't mean that you can actually get into the site and move around. So it's much like permissioning in network drive folders in how we'll do that in SharePoint, but you just need to know your permissions and how they work to make sure that it's supported and that everyone has effective access to that. The other thing, too, is that Internet Explorer is still going to reign supreme when it comes to SharePoint. Yes, it is, and Microsoft will tell you it is certified to use on other browsers, including Safari and Chrome and Firefox, even Opera. And the most recent versions are the ones that you're going to want to look at to use. There are still going to be some downsides if you do not use IE, and here's what they are. One of them is that you can't edit multiple items at once. So in other words, there's a way for us to be able to edit multiple documents in something called a data view. And that's more across the line of metadata tagging and something called taxonomy, which I won't get into in a 101 session. But it's a way for users to more closely identify what this document might relate to help them find it in a search quicker. And so those kind of things won't work in the data view. There's another option that isn't going to work, and that's uploading more than one document at a time. And the reason why is because it wants to include Windows Explorer to do that. The workaround for that is that the user actually has to go into their File Explorer and drag those over in order for them to upload. So just know, like clicking the Browse button to upload a document and then being able to say more than one because you realize you need more than one won't work unless you're in IE. The other thing that is not going to work is this little button that's beautiful that calls Open with Explorer. Because if you ever need to copy and move documents around, that Explorer view is great. But the Explorer view doesn't work if you're not in Explorer. So the workaround for that is to try and use the sync option. And in 2013, just so that you know, we do not use map drives. So a lot of times people will try and do group policy for map drives to get to SharePoint, much like they would try and do it to the network drive. But it only works about half of the time and constantly fails. So in the 365 version, which is the equivalent of SharePoint 2013, we use the sync button. And the sync button allows us to get an offline copy. It only works for PC. It doesn't work for Mac. And that will allow you to drag and move files around as long as you don't have more than 5,000 items within the library. So again, it's like little tricky sticky points that you need to remember, but those are some really good things that can help you through the top issues that you're going to see from a help desk support perspective. Now I'll run through the OneDrive piece and then I'll show you the demo demo that I'm going to show you is only going to be for the option of SharePoint due to time, but you can play around and see what else is there in your own options of OneDrive. So with OneDrive, some top things to remember is that I am telling you, and again, this is my personal messaging that is not the same as Microsoft, so I have to make sure to throw that out there. I am the Microsoft princess, and I condone Microsoft wherever I can, but this one I just have to make sure that I caveat with my own personal preference. So this is used for documents that we would create in a folder that is a personal folder on the network drive for the user, something that would be considered a desktop or a My Document. Instead of backing those up through other methods, we could actually force them to use OneDrive and then have them access their documents anywhere, anytime from that point. The other thing that we should make sure is that the users know how to sync, because that sync is going to give them the option to work in a File Explorer view and be able to work with that on the PCs, not on the Macs. The Mac, just so that you know, actually for OneDrive, there is a preview option that's available. It will only sync the OneDrive. It doesn't sync the SharePoint, and that will be expanded later on with the newest releases into SharePoint and OneDrive. But just so that you know, on the Mac side, the only option as a preview that we have right now is to sync to the OneDrive. So for users that have personal documents, that's great, and they can sync that and have that available. And just know that may be expanded into SharePoint at a later time. The other thing, too, is that educating on how to share with others in both SharePoint and OneDrive becomes priceless to the user. Because if you think about it today, the way that they're working is to take a document and attach it within an email and route it around. And thanks to using Exchange, that will all compress down, but there was a statistic that was done a couple of years ago that was running around saying that on average, for one document stored in, sent through an email, there's roughly 10 different copies of that floating around with people creating it, saving it, storing it, and sending it out again. So the goal of using these tools, whether it be OneDrive or SharePoint, is to have a central access point with people to be able to get to those items and offload the storage space that we would typically see on the Exchange server. So a lot of times, we start to see flag warnings of our Exchange servers that are running close or over, and we're trying to find workarounds for all of that. And part of the reason why is due to document attachments. So this could actually be an offset by having that available on OneDrive or SharePoint, have the user store the document up there, teach them how to send a link to someone else, and then be able to have them use that as a proactive method. And as I mentioned, it's 20,000 item limit for OneDrive. I have seen 100,000 items within someone's OneDrive, and they can't figure out why sync doesn't work. I can't imagine. So those kind of things are things that you want to just be aware of, and then look for ways to double check. A lot of times those personal items that they're storing within the folders are actually considered company documents anyway, or they're duplicates of something else that was eventually stored. So those are things that you can look at as a workaround to that 20,000 item. The other thing too is that there is a way for us to be able to send items, and giving that option of creating a link on the team site allows them to be able to get to their My Site as well. I mean, there's a little corner option they can go to get to it, but if you wanted to make it a little easier for them and not have to have them hunt around all the time, then that would be an option to do. So I'll flip over into the demo real quick. I'll show you that piece. We'll take a couple of questions, and then I'll move into our last component for today that I get to talk to you about, and that's our making money. So bear with me just a second so that I can hop into my little demo here. And the demo that you're seeing on the screen is actually from Microsoft, and I put the link for you on how to be able to get this same option available to you, and I think it's in the Making Money deck, quite frankly. I don't think it's in the SharePoint, but I'll tell you a little bit about this as I'm going through it. This that you're seeing on the screen obviously does not look like out of the box of SharePoint, right? But what we do get the option to be able to take a look at is how far you can take this without actually having to do any code or programming. So everything that you see on the screen, and you can play around with this as part of your own demo, but this is all out of the box. So this screen change, photos, these little interactive items, all of these things that you're seeing here are all out of the box. So just kind of keep that in mind and how far you can take it. It definitely is more of a specialty thing that you get into with SharePoint, but the point is, for somebody that wants a full web design, this is an option that they can get for their intranet completely out of the box. Now, the way that I did this, just so that everyone knows, and again, the link I think is in the Making Money deck that I have for you in the backup, but there's a website that you go to called USMEC, and that is giving us the ability to provision a tenant. It's a trial for us. We get 90 days, but the goal of this is to showcase it to customers to give them an understanding of what it is. Now, for me personally, I'm a Microsoft Experience, and they call it a MEC facilitator, a Microsoft Experience facilitator, so I get access to absolutely everything, but this demo I personally created for us so that you can actually see what it looks like that you would see just by creating a tenant and having that available. The demo script walks you through some different scenarios that can help you sell to the customer and get you familiar with it as well. So again, the details in the back of the deck for the Making Money that we'll go through next, and you'll be able to get this. As long as you're a Microsoft partner, that's all you need. You don't have to be a cloud partner or anything like that. You just have to be a registered partner with Microsoft and have an MPN ID in order to get this kind of stuff. Now, I promised that I would walk you through the demo, so let me go here, and you'll see that I'm actually looking across the screen here, and I'm in sales and marketing. And I've also started to go into our document library. So let me just refresh this for just a second. It's down the screen a little bit here. And I mentioned that we have this sync tool here. And this, let me scroll down just one more time. So the sync option that we're seeing here is the sync option that we'll be able to click on and be able to sync locally into our Windows Explorer. And I don't have anything connected right now, but in File Explorer, what it will do is show up as a little option called SharePoint and then allow you to see everything that's checked. Now, I want to make sure that we understand the point of the sync tool, because a lot of people get a little nervous about having full downloads of documents and having it cached, and then the user can use it for whatever they need, and that might be a company security breach. So to understand a little bit more about what the sync technology does is it replicates a local copy, and if I can equate it to what we know and love in Exchange, it's the equivalent of downloading all of the headers, but then when the user clicks on the email, it actually downloads the whole document. That's the way that this works in File Explorer using the sync tool in SharePoint. So when we click on sync, it'll give us a local copy, and then we'll be able to get all of the names of the documents, but we have to double click on them to be able to open up and actually download from the server. One other thing that I want to mention to you about this sync tool is when we click on it, it's going to pop up and it's going to say sync now, and it's going to say get the OneDrive business app that's right for me. For us as partners, I want to make sure that you know that for the first time, the user has to download the app here for the OneDrive business app. Okay, and the reason why I'm making sure to tell you that is because if user goes in and they just click sync now, the sync now option is going to look like it's going to work, but no files show up, and then they're going to put in a help desk ticket to you and say, my files aren't showing up, and I click the sync now. The reason why is because they never downloaded the app for it to connect to the sync tool to download everything. So just know that's a little bit of a workaround for those kind of things. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that when you take a look here, like this item, if I click on these three dots, I'm going to see previews of the document, but I want to point out this is where we actually go to click on the link to post it to other people. So just know they can copy it, they can paste it, and send it to others as they need to. If I click in here for the three dots as well, there's going to be something called version history. And that's, as I mentioned, is where Microsoft has turned this on by default and made it available, but they didn't lock down the total number of versions we should have. So just to give you an idea, I can click on version history here, and I can be able to see how many versions of the document have been made. And you'll see there's a few versions here. This is the current published major version. It's 2.1. That means that some draft has been published here, but 2.0 is the current one that exists for the rest of the world to see. So I'm making sure to mention that because I'll show you a screen in just a second, but you get the option of choosing minor and major or just pure major. And the reason why I want you to know that is because sometimes, especially in the legal world, there are documents that are incremental. It's like draft 1, 1.1, etc. So those can be accommodated all through this version option for people to be able to see and work with. So I'll close out of this for a moment, and I'm going to go in and take a look here in the library. And I'll go into library settings. And when library settings appears here, we're going to see versioning settings right from here. And if I click on the versioning settings, and I'm going to see this is what I changed. So by default, Microsoft is going to show create major versions. I had changed it to create major and minor. And then down below, this is where we're going to limit it out to 5. So that way we can start to see that we can only have the top 5 versions that people have saved available. And just to make sure that we cover off on what a save is. So within the programs of like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, Microsoft has an auto save feature. That auto save feature does not attribute to the size that we see here in SharePoint. What will attribute is when the user physically clicks the Save button to save the copy, that's when it saves here to SharePoint. So just know Auto Discover does not count, but when they physically click Save, it will count as the most recent version. There are use cases where we have to adjust this beyond 5, but just know for now, 5 is the best practice limit that we tend to use for all of this. Okay, so those are the items, the main items that I wanted to make sure that you see. And there's some other things that I have in the deck for you to take a look at that you can walk through. But in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we cover off on any questions that you might have, since we have a couple of minutes before we switch over to the next session on making money.
Look at that. Can you hear us?
I think the
I can hear you.
Let's roll on. There we go. There you go. If this is supposed to work best in Internet Explorer, why is it that the document library is all the way down halfway down the page? Because users are going to complain about that.
The reason why it's showing halfway down the page is because I made a separate adjustment for a separate demo. You won't have that problem in your situation, so it won't be halfway down the page to worry about.
Now, is it possible to take the application that is required in order to do the sync and pre-phase that actually, or does it have to be actually installed from the link when you click sync?
So there is, for the OneDrive app, if AD is available and you do group policies and MSI pushes and things like that, all of that is available for you to push out. So just like you can push out product updates, upgrades, things like that, there is a way for you to be able to do it so that it's preloaded for the user and ready to go for them.
That would require, as you said earlier, the premium SKU, the E3.
That's true. That's true. It will require the premium SKU in order for you to do that.
Is the reason that the group policy thing only exclusive to E3 because it includes Pro Plus, therefore you can deploy it that way, otherwise everything else is click to run?
That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to clarify, when you refer to SharePoint and OneDrive, are you universally referring to SharePoint on-premises and OneDrive for business, as opposed to
as opposed to what?
As opposed to the consumer OneDrive?
The consumer OneDrive is completely different. First of all, there's no SharePoint equivalent for OneDrive for consumer use. There is a specific SKU. It works a different way, and it has zero governance or anything on the consumer side. So when I talk today about OneDrive and on SharePoint, it is specific to the business SKUs, not the consumer version.
And then SharePoint, you're referring to SharePoint on-premises, not online.
SharePoint Online, because nothing that we're talking about, I mean, there are some things that will apply to SharePoint on-prem, but for our discussion today, it's in online version because we're doing a 365 tour.
How do you differentiate when you have your SharePoint OneDrive for Business and your personal OneDrive for Business? Not personal.
Yeah. That's an awesome question, so thank you for asking that.
I can't figure it out.
Yeah, it's a little
tricky. One way, but not another way.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. You just have to pay attention to the wording, and sometimes when you're looking in File Explorer, it gets cut off. So I don't have a demo here to actually show you because I had to take a clean PC to China. But what actually happens is on the left-hand side, you'll see OneDrive, and it will have a name like your email name, and then underneath it, it'll say OneDrive for Business. So it's just look for the OneDrive for Business option. It's typically underneath the consumer version, but they're together when you look at it in the panel.
In the panel, where? What panel?
In File Explorer.
Oh, okay.
You've got it. Yeah, that's where you'll always see it is File Explorer. Hopefully you're not on a Mac.
No, I'm not.
Okay, good.
I'm on an iPad. I'm on an iPad RDS into my desktop. So.
Oh, okay, yeah. So you'll be able to see it then.
Yeah. You don't install a second one? Because all I see is OneDrive for Business.
If you would have to, in order to see your OneDrive for Personal, you have to do a separate sync from your business. So if you have, if you go into your personal and you click sync, then you should see two. Because the sync doesn't work universally for both consumer and business. They have to be done individually.
I only have one. That's what I don't understand. We go to the website.
Yeah. I would take a look. I mean, I wish I could troubleshoot with you and take a look at it now, but just take a look in the File Explorer and look at the name that's next to OneDrive. If it has your personal email address, that's your personal, and then you know that you have to sync the business, and vice versa if it's the business and you don't see your personal.
Yeah, I see personal, but it doesn't have my email address in it, which is kind of weird.
Okay, so then the first thing that I tell you to do is go into the OneDrive on the business account and click sync on that and take a look and see if it shows up for you.
Okay. Thank
you. You're welcome. No other questions? We're good? Okay, so I just need to do a quick check with Harry. Harry, we have a separate link for the Making Money. So do you want me just to continue on this link or?
Harry's not in the room at the moment.
He's not here.
Send me a check. Can you stay on this one, or do you need to go to a different one? Oh, he's probably he's watching from somewhere.
Melanie, whatever you feel is best.
Okay, so then I'll just stay on here so that way, you know, we can maximize our time together and make sure that I get you as much information as I can on the Making Money stuff. So that said, I'm going to switch over, and this one has no live demo, just so that you know. It's just a PowerPoint presentation. But I'll go into this and connect over to our Making Money. And this one, I have to say, is, and I have to make sure to caveat this, I think everyone in the room is a Microsoft partner in some way, shape, or form. So if you happen to be an employee working for a company that you're just here for the knowledge of understanding, you know, what 365 has to offer, the Making Money might be a little bit tough. So I just want to make sure that we lay the groundwork for everyone in the room that's an IT provider in some way, shape, or form to really get the benefit of this one. So as we go through this, we're going to see there's an advisor option, and then there's an open option. We talked about that as part of Office 365 earlier with the licensing. So I'll skip over all of that stuff, and you can look at this on your leisure if you decide to. The point I want to get at is what I'm showing on the screen right now. And this one is such an eye chart. I know you're in a smaller room this time, but it's still a little bit of an eye chart to walk through. So I'll try and walk you through it, but then feel free to spend some time with it after today, because this is actually just, when you double click on it, it's an Excel file. So you can actually plug in your own and figure this out. And here's the reason why I gave this to you, is because there's a Microsoft number that they give, and then there's my number that I do.
Then there's a number that you give. That's what happens when you do that. That's almost as good as
numbers to what you need. So,
We want your number card. Yeah. Microsoft censored you.
it's probably the Chinese government. So they were like, what? Making money? No. So, all right. So here's what we're taking a look at. When you go through the Microsoft SMB Live workshops, or you go through the Cloud Sure Step or anything like that, they want to focus on how much revenue you can make as a selling point. But they want to give you full-blown P&Ls to do it, which is fine, but in my case, the way I looked at it was a little bit different, and I said, the full P&L includes fixed costs. And by the way, I come from a finance background before turning to IT. So my finance hat is saying all those fixed costs are fixed. Let's just focus on the variable components and see what that money looks like. And that will tell you kind of where you're at, comparatively speaking, to build from. And that's where you're seeing this. So this number probably isn't going to be true to what you're doing, but I said, what's the most conservative option that I could put on a slide that everybody would buy into? And that's what this is. So what we're seeing is an option of going through, and at the very top it says current. And what I said was, okay, in general, as an MSP, we look at things a couple of different ways. We say, I have to manage servers, and I have to manage people issues. People issues being help desk tickets, things like that we're working with. And then the server management is the backup and the maintenance and all of that great stuff that we charge. And one of the big sticky points, I think, in a lot of our minds, and part of the reason why it's taken us so long to really embrace 365, is because we don't have a model for what happens if the server goes away. So what does that actually look like? Immediately, that's a component that we have built into our business. So if that goes away, what are we left with, right? We're left with the other piece, and the other piece we may not feel is going to give us as much benefit from a revenue standpoint. And then what are we going to do? So that's why I built this in. So I could say, okay, here's the server management fees per month at a conservative rate. Here's the customer service fees at a conservative rate. And what is it going to look like if we make a change? So that's where you're seeing I actually calculated everything back to a per person, because that was the only way that I could get us to an apple-to-apple comparison. So what I said was, let's say arbitrarily that the server management fees come out to $10 per person per month. And then the people fees for managing the tickets and everything comes out to $10 per person per month. And what does that look like if we sell Open Office or if we sell Advisor Office? And that's where these next little buckets come through. So you can see you're not making, I mean, I put some parameters in down at the bottom, which you can look at later, but the point is it's 75 cents versus 96 cents. So you can see you make just a couple of cents more if you decide to sell Open. That's without a lot of incentives or anything like that are going on in the marketplace today. That's like worst case. And then what I said was, okay, we know that the server management fee piece goes away in some way, shape, or form, but it won't go away 100% because we're still going to be their service provider. And we might be giving them some kind of fees to manage things on their behalf. So instead of dropping it down to 0, I dropped it in half to $5. And then there's a one-time extra bonus that we get of roughly from Microsoft $8 per person on the migration thing. So what I said in the end was, here's what the numbers look like both monthly and annually, and I'll flat out tell you, you will lose money. If you did this at 50% at $10 a head, like you'd lose per account, depending on what the size is, about $500 or $600 annually per account. So we've got to look at, okay, what's the real story then on Office 365? And that's the piece that I'm going to tell you now. So there's some options down at the bottom that are all grayed out. And I know it's an eye chart, so you can look at it later as you need to and actually plug your own numbers in, because you just double click on this and enter. But for the backup, a lot of people think that when we move to Office 365, backup is not needed. And what I'll say to that is I wouldn't necessarily say that. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because, yes, Microsoft does a great job of replicating data and making it accessible and has a 99.9% guaranteed SLA uptime. The problem that we run into is that there's no backup copy of information from a compliance perspective. And so that's where we need to take a look and see, based on the industry of the customer, do they really need to be backed up? Does their data really need to be backed up at all for any specific reason, and what's the record keeping of time that we need with that? And then when it comes to SharePoint, if you're going to open the SharePoint door, I would tell you 100% to consider backup, because there are very limited options from recovery capabilities that we have in SharePoint out of the box. And it's like the Wild West when users start working in there. So every single time I start working with SharePoint, I talk backup with the customer, because there are some very good backup solutions that are at market and coming out to market that are going to provide very low cost availability to have that information backed up. And when you come to 365, doing like a data snapshot becomes a little bit difficult, right? So we've got to take a look and see what our options are. So what I would say to you is, because we're going to 365, don't take backup off the table. The next thing that I have grayed out there is encryption. And yes, Microsoft has an encryption layer within it, and yes, Microsoft will tell you that it's HIPAA compliant. But that doesn't necessarily meet the needs of an end-to-end encryption solution for a lot of industries. So let me give you an example. If you are working with a company who is they're like a condo association, because in New York that's prevalent, it runs rampant, right? We have condo associations and buildings and everything, and they're sending our financial documents through Yahoo, Gmail, whatever else, right? Those are that's the last place that we need that stuff done. So housing associations are a great way. You know, they aren't even thinking about a corporate email, let alone an end-to-end encryption option. Insurance brokers, end-to-end encryption option is the perfect item for them to be able to do, and a lot of them need it as part of the compliance with full end-to-end as part of their business practice. A lot of financial firms need the same thing, where they have to have that full tunneled end-to-end encryption. Microsoft offers a volume license, but you need 5 licenses to do it. To be able to purchase it. You can get it through a distributor, and it's relatively inexpensive, but there are other options that are out there for encryption that you can take a look at as well. So when we start looking at 365, yes, there's an encryption label. Yes, it's HIPAA compliant. Yes, you can go into the Trust Center and print out that document, but it may not be a one-size-fits-all compliance perspective for those kind of industries. So don't take encryption off the table when we start talking about 365. The other thing is, with SharePoint and OneDrive, you open the door to develop a services revenue model, to say, okay, well, I'm going to support you on the SharePoint Online, or I'm going to support you on Exchange Online. And yes, I, as a business owner, know that that's happening, but I'll also be the first person to tell you that the moment that customer calls and doesn't get an immediate response like they get with you, they may decide that they want to have a services agreement with you, even though they may not have decided to do it initially. So what I would say to you is, from developing a revenue model, especially when it comes to SharePoint and OneDrive, that's a brand new revenue source for you to harness and take advantage of to make more money with. There's another thing that I have on here. It's migration plus monthly services. So yes, you can, as I mentioned with SharePoint, after the migration, of course, continue to build that services model with them. Even though they're on Office 365, you get that ability to still build in that model and be their first line of support and things like that to assist them. The last thing that I have mentioned here is something known as Link Phone Bridge. And I'm glad that Greg Plum is in the room because I always talk about Greg whenever I talk about the Link Phone Bridge. So by default, we get, as part of Link, PC to PC. In other words, I can call somebody else that has Link, but if I need a phone bridge, that phone bridge means that I have to go through a third party. And there are three, and the most popular one people use is Intercall, and if you need to check it out, it's in the portal underneath the phone setup stuff. But what ends up happening is we actually, as partners, get an opportunity to resell these features for our customers. So I'll give you the perfect example, and I'm mentioning this because Greg is in the room, and he and I actually dissected my bill on 365 to understand this. So my bill is roughly about $100 per month, and it's roughly 4.9 cents per minute, and I have a minimum conference fee requirement that I am required to pay with Intercall on Office 365, and I have to meet like $17, and if it's over 25 people, I get hit with another charge and all this. So on average, it's like $100 a month that I have been paying. All of a sudden, my bill back in fall of last year jumped up, and it was like $700 a month, and I was very upset about that. And there was a mistake, and they corrected it. But it turns out that with Greg, there's no minimum. And it's Intercall, by the way. It's the same exact option we would use through 365, only going through a broker known as Greg. And so what happens is I am able to get a lower rate, and I can give the client an upcharge rate and make money off of it. So the whole point to this is, yes, if you look at everything just in black and white that I have here on the screen, and you were to be the most conservative and say you're going to drop your management of server fees in half, and you are just going to let them go direct, all that great stuff, sure, you might lose money. But there's so many other opportunities that are available for you to take advantage of that in the end it really doesn't go away because you're still managing things in some way, shape, or form and getting additional revenue streams through it, especially in the case of SharePoint and OneDrive. So it's definitely worth trying to take a look at and see what opportunities are there to try and help you make money. Now, that was my slide, and I'm going to switch to the Microsoft slide. So in the Microsoft slide, that Microsoft slide says, hey guys, we want to make this even better for you. So what they did, and this is a little bit over a year old, but some of the top cloud partners Microsoft interviewed just said, hey, what are your numbers? What are you doing? We want to tell the success story to others. So this information that I'm giving you is actually not coming from an inflated number Microsoft came up with. It's actually coming from a detailed discussion with various cloud partners to get the real dirt, and that's what these slides are telling you. So for example, what they're saying is that there's a baseline revenue of roughly $48 per seat, and then it goes up from there. So you'll see as I move to the next slide, and again, this is based on actual data, it's roughly coming out to about 33 grand extra per deal. And that's a 60-seat customer. So if you have, 10 6-seat customers, then that would equal the same thing. Or I'm sorry, 6 10-seat customers, same thing. But anyway, the point is this is allowing us to see what the potential actually is based on what the top cloud providers are actually telling you. So for example, it's coming out to $33,000 per year in total, and you're going to see $4,000 is going to be that incremental option that you see for year one for the migration. So you can see how the step-ups get there and what that actually means as options for you, but the point is there is a way for us to really make money with Office 365. And then some of the things that they're telling us, and again, this is information coming from top cloud partners, but what they're saying is that what's helped them be successful are some of the things that I've already mentioned mention to you. It's third-party migration tools. Oh, which reminds me, I think you saw a presentation earlier today with Tim, who was there from Skykick. And I personally actually use Skykick for all of my migrations. And part of my story on why I became Cloud Champ was because I was looking for a way to work with the sub-10 seat group. And I needed to scale it because doing it manually was not going to be an option after trying it a couple of times. And somebody from Microsoft actually recommended Skykick to me. And I had tested out other providers at that point, but they didn't do everything I needed them to do, and Skykick did. So that's how I ended up going with Skykick for it. And they make that process extremely seamless. But outside of just Skykick for the migration tool, using third-party tools in general have been a big help for people to be able to implement and work with. The other thing, too, and we haven't touched on this yet, is training. Training, I would say, coming from my business being a training environment, especially when going into 365, there are some differences. There's differences because people are moving to a newer technology that they didn't have before. There are some differences in working with document storage than what they had before. So it's those kind of little things that you might be able to make some extra money on with training. There are plenty of templates, tutorials, things like that that you can take advantage of. Microsoft also has an option for new customers that's called the Admin Success Center that gives some extra training in there as well, and you can actually just grab that content and send it out and make it yours if you want. But the point is, training becomes a good component to include. Tier 1 support. Hang on one second. Let me get through this and then we'll open it up for questions, okay? So with Tier 1 support, we have the option of being their first line of defense, and that's what this is recognizing. And then the other thing, too, that they're putting at the end is creating SharePoint templates. In other words, canned templates, like document libraries that have versioning already locked down to 5, those kind of things, that made them very successful. Okay? So a couple of last slides, and then we'll open it up for questions for you, is that one of the things that they have done from a partner perspective as one of the top cloud partners, again, is that they used a low-touch, centralized sales and service model. In other words, they tried to make things as automated and packaged as they possibly could, so that way, they could just implement it, not have to spend a lot of time, but still be able to charge for it and make profit off of it. The other thing, too, is that they were, in this case, and again, these are top cloud partners that had the bandwidth, so I have to put that message in there. They actually created a separate sales team. Now, a lot of us in the room, we are the salesperson and we are the owner of the company too. So being able to have a new dedicated salesperson may not work for us, but that's one of the things that they had done. One of the other things they had done is leverage telesales support with smaller customers. So in other words, they would just pick up the phone and call the smaller customers that were brand new to try and get them on board rather than trying to make a lot of in-person visits like they would do with the larger customers. And keep in mind, these are larger firms that are telling these stories. So you have to put that kind of in perspective. The one thing that they did mention is investing in digital marketing. This one I'll mention to you because I put it as part of the deck in the back for you. So I mentioned the USMEC tool as the Microsoft Experience Center demo that I showed you for SharePoint. But there's another option that's baked in there that you can take advantage of in my deck, and it's called Microsoft Community Connections. But basically what it does is give us some web syndication options as well as pre-marketed or templated package things to create PowerPoint presentations, emails, things like that, so that we can actually go out in front of customers or go out in front of an audience of a group of people or do it on a webcast and promote ourselves, things like that. So all of that, when they talk about digital marketing, is bundled up under Microsoft Community Connections, and I have that information in the deck in the very back for you to take advantage of. Great program, and really good way to get content quickly without having to reinvent the wheel when our specialty isn't a marketing specialty. We do break fix. We don't do marketing. So this is a really good way to try and help us all for free from Microsoft. to take advantage of. One last thing that I'll mention, and then we'll open it up for questions for you, is, and Harry loves this slide, so and it's very near and dear story to him. So when I started reselling 365, so I can tell you this really does work. When I started working with 365, I would try and equate it to a cup of coffee at a specialty coffee store. So I would say, you know, if your coffee drink costs $4, you're really talking the equivalent of one of those coffee drinks for the month. And people got it, you know, for exchange online, and, you know, it would be a reason for them to move to it. And then you're talking for the E3 equivalent, you're talking a little bit over one a week, like 1.5, so to speak, a week. And then you would be able to, you know, take advantage of it. They get that, right? So that's what this is saying here. This is saying, okay, so for 84 cents per day, or the equivalent of 24% of a Starbucks, you would be able to have this for your group. Same thing here with the cell phone bill. People relate to that. So, for example, it could cost $25.83 a month, which is 37% of your average cell phone bill. And then finally, comparative to having a person on staff on-prem, you're looking at roughly $18.6 thousand, which is the cost for a 60-person company. And that's roughly 22% of the cost of having an IT pro staff there on site. So again, just trying to make it relative so that they get it in their own real terms, in real life, of what that actually equates to. So that was everything that I wanted to make sure that we covered. You'll see a couple of last things, and they're in the deck, but the one thing you should make sure that you have is internal use rights. The link for it's here, but basically what that does is it signs you up so that you have the ability to start selling Office 365 and to be able to use what's called delegated admin rights, and so that you can see all of your customers in your portal. That's separate from partner of record. And then you'll also see that I put in here the ready-to-go marketing resources. That's the digital marketing stuff that I just mentioned. And then the demo tool that I showed you from the last session in SharePoint is included right from here too. And then there's a lot of other stuff. There, like once a week, Microsoft has cloud profitability webcasts, and you can take a look at that. And a ton of free training is available to you on Cloud Share Step to take advantage of too. So again, all of it's available. Another 30 slides are in the deck for you to take a look at with P&Ls and things like that. But I'll go ahead and open it up for questions, because I know we had some people very patiently waiting, and thank you for that.
So you showed a slide there that had writing that was almost completely impossible to see, where you were rushing through, like you went from 96 cents to all of a sudden like $33,000. Can you go back? Can you explain how it is that you go from 96 cents to that much money?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. So first of all, go ahead.
The other thing is that the people that are doing the most cloud sales and such and forth, they're not in small businesses.
Actually, a lot of them are small businesses, believe it or not. I know quite a few of them that are.
Okay.
Yeah. So to take you through how this gets from here to the other thing. So what you're seeing here, and I put it, and again, and I apologize, it's an eye chart. You'll have to look at this more in detail on your own. But what I said is that I'm basing this on an E1 SKU times 12 months times 10 users. Okay, so this deal size is what I would consider more or less our conservative deal size, where, you know, in your business you may service from companies 10 and above from the user size. So I said, let's go with that. Let's go with 10 users. Let's not worry about the 60 users right now that are on the next slide and how that translates when all is said and done. Let's do bare basics, and that's what this slide is here. The difference is, when you start to look at these extra options in here, what they're saying is, let's multiply that out. Let's take a conservative number, you know, that Melanie had, but let's boost it up a little bit to what partners are really doing. Let's not be so conservative that Melanie took as the worst case scenario. Let's really build this out. And that's what this is. This says if there's a 60-seat customer, this is what it's going to cost. It's $10,800 on licensing. It's $4,000 for migration. Another $4,000 on average for support for the 60 seats. It's for extras and add-ons. It's another $5,300. And then for extra projects like migrating, onboarding, things like that, of data, you know, all those things become extra projects that are done constantly over the course of time. So that's how they're getting to the $33,000. And that's why you're seeing such a differential between my very, very just one seat deal conservative kind of thing versus a 60-seat deal that you might work up to over the course of time. But again, look at those, you know, later on at your own. There's a lot of detail in there. You can build out your own P&Ls because I put the detail in the back of the deck, and you can play around with my numbers here just by double-clicking on them and changing them around when you actually can see it in front of the screen a little bit easier.
Can we get the spreadsheet for the P&Ls?
It's actually included in here. So what happens is when you double-click on this, hang on, it's not working right now because I'm in slideshow. But what ends up happening is when I double-click on this, it becomes an Excel spreadsheet. So I can just enter I can type in and enter all of my information direct from here.
Oh, in PowerPoint.
That's what she said.
That's in PowerPoint, or is that in Excel?
It's in PowerPoint. I pasted it as an Excel, by the way. You can take an Excel spreadsheet and you can paste it inside of PowerPoint, so that way when you update it, you can update it directly in PowerPoint. That's what I did here.
Ah,
Okay.
hey, Melanie, it's Greg.
Hi.
Hi. So looking at these numbers, can you make them a little bit bigger again?
Yeah, sure.
It didn't strike me as there's a real compelling reason to go with the open model versus the advisor model, looking at these particular numbers.
Well, keep in mind that I had to keep this as conservative as possible, right? So this number of the 96 cents per person is probably going to be much higher because of the incentives that Microsoft has today. So the incentive rebate that I did over here on the scenario was based off of the 12% rebate. Right now, it's anywhere between 12 and it runs the gamut, but it can be anywhere from 12 to 30%. So that number can actually increase per person based off of what the incentives that you qualify for, depending on what deal you have. So this is just a baseline, very bare bones conservative, but it can increase much more based off of what's actually going on today, especially since this is Q4 of Microsoft and they're trying to make sure that everyone gets on the cloud as best as they can. Then you're seeing so many incentive deals that were never part of the story before. So so that's why this is super conservative.
Melanie, partner of record versus delegation admin. How do we?
Yeah.
I noticed they are two separate things. How do we distinguish and find out if we're partner of record? I know delegated admin is one thing.
Sure. But partner of record is a little bit different, yeah. So I'm not able to show you right now, but I'll try my best to talk you through it. So with the partner of record, in order for you to check to see if you're associated with partner of record, is when you log in to the partner network, it's partner.microsoft.com, you can log in that way, and then there's going to be an option underneath your membership to go into your dashboard. And when you go into the dashboard, it'll show you an overview of how many accounts you have and who's been a new subscriber in the last 30 days, who's expired, who's on trial, all that stuff. But then you can actually go in and see all of the detail and export that into Excel. So you can see the detail of all of that information and double check. And what I'll also say to that is on the physical reports for paying you, Microsoft runs about a couple of months behind on that, so expect about a quarter behind before you'll actually see a payment for it, but you can tell if the transaction is live through that dashboard. So that's how you check the partner of record. Again, it's through the partner portal, and underneath membership, it's in the dashboard area. For the delegated admin, it's in a completely different location. So when you sign up for internal usage rights, that tags your partner ID with Office 365. And that gives you the ability to do what's called delegated rights, where when you click on that little square in the left corner in the portal, it'll allow you to see something called partner. And when you click on partner, it'll show all of your accounts that you have delegated admin for, and then you'll see that. That is separate from than the actual partner of record subscription, but the good thing I like about delegated admin is that it's exactly the same portal. It's now one-for-one. So when I say that, what I'm really saying is over the course of the last couple of years, we still needed a separate admin account in order to administrate on behalf of our customers because didn't have everything there. Now it's a one-for-one, so everything's there. But what the good thing about that is that if you don't see that customer name listed, then on the left-hand side there's something called Build Your Business. And when you click on that, you can actually send a link to your customer to validate you, so that way, you know, you have delegated rights on their behalf. But delegated rights is in the Office 365 portal, and then the other one is underneath the actual NPM portal itself.
So can partner of record be transferred from one partner to another?
Partner of record can be transferred from one to another. And just to give you a little bit of information about this, so a partner of record can be very interesting. And the reason why I say that is because if you are in the top tier of cloud champs, then every so often you get a list of unidentified or unassigned accounts. So in other words, Microsoft wants to work with its partners as much as they can. And if a customer signs up direct through the portal and they don't have a partner attached to the account, the cloud champs get a list and they get the ability to call down, and it doesn't give, because of PII, it can't give everything, but it'll give the company name and what service plan they have now. And so if they're not on an E3 plan, then the ability is for us as partners to upsell. So the top tier partners get this. Well, guess what? If you don't have partner of record assigned to your customer, then they show up on this list for the cloud champs to start calling. And so Cloud Champ calls and they start talking to them about Microsoft, and then all of a sudden partner of record is assigned to the new guy and not to you that is their actual service provider. So that's why you want to make sure that all of your customers have a partner of record assigned so that you're protected as the partner and not getting swept away by some other partner just because they happen to call.
You know, it's Microsoft's goal to make every one of the Microsoft partners a cloud champ, yeah?
The goal ultimately is to make as many of them as a cloud champ as possible, absolutely.
So then how does it make any sense to give already the cloud champs, the people that could be Office 365 customers, to the people who are already doing it right? It would make
Because you're not, I can answer that for you. Now, I'm going to give you a non-Microsoft answer. I have to make sure to tell you that because I'm not a full-time employee of Microsoft, right? But here's what I will tell you, is that the reason that they're giving the cloud champs is because the cloud champs have a proven track record of being able to sell Office 365. If you are in an unmanaged bucket within Microsoft, meaning you don't have a dedicated person associated to you and you're not a cloud champ because you don't have enough sales yet, Microsoft is not going to give those to you yet because in their mind you haven't met the requirements of cloud champ to fully fulfill everything. So what they're trying to do is quick turnarounds for upsells wherever they can, and they think that the cloud champs are the designated group to do that. Again, I'm not a Microsoft full-time employee. I'm just saying that's the rationale behind what's going on.
So it would make more sense to me if Microsoft would use their money to actually educate those that are absolutely confused about the Office 365 thing, like most of the people still sitting in this room, still.
Okay, so let me try and diffuse that just a little bit, okay? Because what I'll tell you as a partner, and again, I'm speaking to you as another partner, I can tell you the resources that they have available for you. They have tried 10 ways to Sunday to help us. And here's what they have available. And I actually put them in the deck for you to take advantage of. They have twice a year SMB live events to educate us. They have a monthly call that any partner can sit on to get education about what's going on in our region. They have a Cloud SureStep training program for free that you can spend days in, all free, both technical and business, to try and help you. They have tried every option that they possibly can. They send out newsletters. They do everything they can to try and get partners engaged. But it's only as good as what you see and what you read. So that's why, as part of the deck, I've included those informational pieces for you to get the knowledge that you need as additional training resources. But what I'll say to you is that the information is there. It's out on the portal. You just have to know where to go to get it. And I gave it to you, handed it to you on a silver platter in this deck.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
With all due respect, though, Melanie, most of the people that actually are in the business are technical and not marketing professionals. So therefore,
And that's okay, because Microsoft gave you all the technical stuff. Next, Steve Hall, whose name has been on a billboard, who's one of the top partners and deals with cloud, he's a super technical box guy. And he's the one that did the training for you along with Chris. So there's 2 days worth of technical guidance that you can get on administering, UpRamp, everything you need for 365. How to do two-token ADFS, how to do DirSync, what the differences are, what you need to know for exams. It's there. And I gave it to you as a link within the document.
right, but okay.
We're in Microsoft.
Microsoft's right out the hall. You're arguing with somebody on the phone.
We're in the building.
Hey, let's get Melanie, Harry here.
Yeah.
So let's make sure we save time for the coffee shop conversation. You know, I wrote that blog. I revised it.
Yes, exactly. So, so Harry, it's probably a good time to turn it over to you, because my deck is done that I've gone through, and I went through the coffee code or the coffee slide so that I could save room for you to be able to tell the story.
Okay.
Melanie, just one thing. Harry, one thing. Melanie, this Excel thing that you dropped into the PowerPoint, we think it's a picture that you pasted in. It's not an actual interactive Excel. Just please double check on your end.
Yeah, it should be an interactive Excel, and as a backup option, I'll make sure that you get the file. I'll send it over to Heather so she can post it as part of the download options. And I'm watching the email come through, and just for those of us that are asking me about sending the slides are going to be available to you, so make sure to get those. I'm not going to send them direct to you, but if you do need something different, like an Excel file that's separate, things like that, I can hand it over to Harry so that he can make sure to get that as part of the download for you. So I'll just do it as a follow-up just so that you know you'll be able to get it. Sometimes it takes them a little bit to load it into the system for you to download. So if it doesn't happen in the next few minutes, just know that it will happen, and you'll probably get a follow-up and mentioning that the decks are available.
Yeah, and then we have the existing tour slide already up on the site. So we go to your handout today. Next to the QR code beneath it is the password of the
What's up there now is a PDF. It's not the clickable with the Excel file.
Okay.
Not the
All right.
All right.
So then,
you got to run for your meeting.
Undercover work.
yeah, it's true. Yeah, I do in just a couple of minutes. So as an action item on my end, just know that I will follow up and make sure that that Harry's team has the actual PowerPoints with the physical Excel document, so that way you can take advantage of that, and I'll send it over to them in just a couple of minutes, and then they'll find a way to get it over to you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Melanie.
Thanks, Melanie.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. And sorry I couldn't be there. I wish I could have been there in person today, but I'm seeing questions and everything come through, so just know, continue to send me any questions that you have. I'll try and help you out any possible way that I can. My goal is to make you successful and make you great partners that are working in 365. That's why I do this. So, so I'm happy to share any information that I have, you know, that I know that will help you.
Thank you.
Time to start your Friday.
All right, so a couple of things, and I realize, you know, the evening is a little bit later, so some people may be moving on, I get that. So that's a show with to attached app. Okay, so they won by several votes. Congratulations.